Bridges are the invisible front line of war. Whoever controls the bridge controls logistics, and whoever controls logistics controls the war. Russia knew this very well in Crimea. There were two lines keeping the 60,000 soldiers on the peninsula alive: the Kirk Bridge and the 630-kilometer land corridor running through southern Ukraine. Kirk had become restricted to heavy vehicles after previous attacks. The land corridor was filling this gap, and the most critical choke point at this corridor's entry to Crimea was tied to a single bridge, the Chongar Bridge over Sich Lake between Kherson and Crimea. But on June 7th, Ukraine cut the last reliable artery feeding Crimea. How that artery was cut became clear within hours, and the details were provided not by Ukraine, but by Russia's own officials. Russia's appointed Kherson Governor Salo confirmed the attack on his Telegram channel. The bridge deck had been damaged by a drone strike during nighttime hours. The attack aimed not to completely destroy the bridge, but to riddle the road surface with holes and paralyze traffic, and it succeeded. The Junkoy checkpoint was closed for security reasons, and all traffic was redirected to the Army and Perekop crossings. No repair timeline was announced. The Ukrainian side made no official claim, but reliable sources linked the operation to the Special Operations Force's Medium Strike Units, a structure specializing in precision point strikes. This strike was not a one-off operation. It was the culmination of a systematic campaign being built for weeks. Ukraine's 3rd Special Purpose Regiment had announced it established air control over a section of the Malat-Chongar route. Drones were now determining what passes and what doesn't on certain segments of this corridor. Ukraine had been monitoring the bridge for a long time, tracking the transit times, density, and routes of Russian convoys. And at the moment the pressure began to effectively paralyze the corridor, it struck the most critical point. The impact of the strike began to be felt within hours. When Chongar closed, land entry to Crimea was reduced to two alternatives: Armenians and Perekop. Both are further west, extending the distance by 50 to 150 kilometers and forcing convoys through routes closer to the front lines and more exposed to Ukrainian drones. A longer route means more fuel consumption, more time on the road, and more risk of becoming a target. When Chongar was similarly closed in 2023, convoys experienced delays exceeding 50%. This time the picture is much heavier, because the corridor has already been under systematic pressure for months, and the scale of that pressure is shown by the numbers. The R280 Novorossiya Highway has effectively turned into a death road since May 2026. Ukraine's medium-range drones are systematically striking convoys 20 to 300 kilometers behind the front line. OSCENT groups documented the destruction of more than 125 fuel tankers and military trucks on this corridor in May. Salo had been forced to sign a decree restricting heavy vehicle traffic at the end of May. Now the most efficient route that restricted traffic could use has also closed. Chongar's closure overloads alternative routes, extends convoy times, and every extra kilometer increases exposure time to Ukrainian drones. The fuel, ammunition, and spare parts for the 40 to 60,000 soldiers in Crimea must pass through this narrowing corridor, and the corridor's capacity drops with every strike. The corridor is narrowing, but the practical meaning of this for Russian forces in Crimea is much heavier. The first impact was felt directly in Jangoy. Jankoy is not just a checkpoint, it's the distribution center for all military logistics in Crimea. Railway junctions, ammunition depots, and fuel terminals are all concentrated here. Convoys coming via Chongar fed this center. The bridge's closure cut Junko's primary resupply line. When ammunition depots stop filling, the firepower of artillery units at the front directly drops. A brigade's self-sustaining duration is approximately 10 days. After that, it's entirely dependent on the resupply line, and that line's most efficient route is now closed. The Russian garrison in Crimea consists of an estimated 40 to 60,000 soldiers. Feeding these soldiers required hundreds of military vehicles, fuel tankers, and ammunition trucks to pass through the land corridor every day. A single fuel tanker being struck can disrupt a brigade's 24-hour fuel needs. More than 125 tankers were destroyed on this corridor in May. Chongar was the entry point for this traffic into Crimea, and now that traffic must pass through longer, slower, and more dangerous routes. The fuel, food, ammunition, and medical supplies of 60,000 soldiers must continue flowing through the same narrowing corridor. But the corridor's capacity drops with every strike. The second impact appears in air defense. The S-400 and Pantsir systems in Crimea conduct surveillance with continuously operating radars, and these radars consume large amounts of electricity. Mobile generators come into play at points where the fixed power grid is insufficient. Generators burn diesel. When fuel is delayed, radar operating times are shortened. Shorter radar time means more Ukrainian drones reaching their targets. It's undetected. More drones means more depot and convoy strikes, which further increases the fuel delay. The vicious cycle deepens with every turn, and Ukraine is consciously feeding this cycle. The third impact is at the front lines. Russian forces in the Karen and Zaporizhia directions were receiving resupply via Crimea. Rotation, spare parts, and new unit deployments pass through this line. Chongar's closure slows rotation. Soldiers at the front are held in their positions without knowing when they'll be replaced. When spare parts don't come, damaged vehicles cannot be repaired, and the unit's active vehicle count decreases a little more every week. Zlogor Otravsky describes the situation as Crimea's transport isolation, and the morale drop is felt at the front before the logistics data. And the economic dimension of this picture is also heavy. Longer alternative routes mean more fuel consumption. Russia is spending fuel to transport fuel. As the risk of being struck on the road increases, finding civilian drivers becomes harder, and transportation costs multiply. Repairing the bridge could take up to a month. But even if repair is completed, Ukraine can strike the same bridge again with drones costing a few thousand. Russia spending millions on repair versus Ukraine spending thousands on strikes. The cost asymmetry grows against Russia with every repetition. Ukraine is applying this cost asymmetry not just on the corridor, but in the heart of Crimea. The night Chongar was struck, the peninsula's interior was also under fire. The Special Operations Force's medium strike units targeted two critical fuel facilities simultaneously with the bridge, and the target selection was not coincidental. The first target was the Skaya fuel depot near Lenino. This facility is approximately 200 kilometers from the front line, and normally at a distance Ukraine couldn't reach. But new generation long-range kamikaze drones changed this equation. The depot was a transfer center used by the Russian army as a distribution point for fuel oil, diesel, and bitumen, and dispatched fuel to every point in Crimea via railway tankers. Built in the Soviet era, closed in the 1990s, and recommissioned in 2015 by the BK Terminal Company after Russia's annexation, meaning Russia had consciously rebuilt this facility as part of its military infrastructure in Crimea. After the attack, local residents observed the glow of the fire, and NASA-firm satellite imagery confirmed that the heat signature was expanding. The fire could not be brought under control. The second target was much larger and much more critical. The Naval Petroleum Terminal in Feodosia, Crimea's largest fuel storage complex. The facility can hold up to 250,000 tons of fuel and is a multifunctional structure designed for fuel transfer from railway tankers to sea vessels. Russian occupation forces were using this terminal as an emergency fuel reserve, a strategic backup to be activated when normal resupply lines are cut. Ukraine struck precisely that backup. Drones reached the terminal approximately 250 kilometers from the front line, and explosions were heard across Feodosia. The Atesh guerrilla movement and the Crimean Wind Monitoring Channel confirmed the attack, and a third target was struck that same night. A military unit in Sovetskoye. Explosion sounds were also reported from Junkoy, Sevastopol, and Simirop. The entire peninsula was under alert throughout the night. In a single night, Ukraine cut the road where fuel comes from, struck the facilities where fuel is stored, and targeted the units that use the fuel. These three actions were not independent of each other. They were part of a coordinated operation, a three-layered logistics destruction. The result of this three-layered pressure has now become visible on Crimea's streets. On the evening of June 6th in Sevastopol, the Occupation Administration took a radical step in fuel distribution. A limited sales system using personal QR codes. Each vehicle owner can get up to 20 L's of fuel once per week. The next allowance comes 7 days later. The QR code is only valid from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and can only be used at designated stations. The system was announced after midnight. At 1:47 on the morning of June 7th, Sevastopol Governor Raz announced that the day's codes had been exhausted. It hadn't even lasted 2 hours. The codes ran out, but the lines at gas stations didn't end. Drivers began waiting from midnight for the next day's codes. The picture in Sevastopol was a reflection of Crimea as a whole. Crimea head Axion had completely halted cash gasoline sales on June 4th and openly confessed that there would be no coupons for open sale, and there won't be in the near future. The next day, he opened a helpline for tourists who couldn't leave the peninsula. Hundreds of vacationers had arrived by car, but were stranded because they couldn't find fuel to return. Priority for fuel was given to public services and law enforcement, but even the 400-vehicle public transit fleet couldn't find sufficient fuel. Black market prices rose to 3 times the normal price. Empty shelves began appearing in stores, and retailers imposed restrictions on food sales because the trucks bringing goods to markets also couldn't find fuel. Russia described Crimea as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Now, that aircraft carrier has run out of fuel. And this crisis didn't appear overnight. It's the result of systematic pressure accumulating for months. According to Bloomberg's data, 38 attacks were carried out on Russian refineries between January and May 2026, with 16 refineries hit in May alone, the highest number in a single month since the start of the war. According to Reuters, by mid-May, refineries with a combined daily capacity of 238,000 tons, approximately 1/4 of all Russian refinery capacity, had suspended operations. While production dropped, demand didn't change, and the gap directly reflected on Crimea's streets. This collapse on Crimea's streets didn't happen overnight. It's the cumulative result of a systematic campaign being built for years. Ukraine started this campaign at sea. Naval drones systematically struck the Black Sea Fleet. The flagship Moskva was sunk, landing ships were destroyed, and fleet losses exceeded 1/3. Russia was forced to withdraw its remaining ships from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. When sea control was lost, Crimea's capacity to be fed from the sea dropped dramatically. The pressure shifted to the Kerch Bridge. The major attacks in 2022 and 2023 permanently restricted the bridge's heavy cargo capacity. And on the night of June 7th, another attack attempt was made with Neptune missiles. Russian air defense claimed it intercepted the missiles, but the message was clear. Kerch is not safe either. The sea closed, Kerch was restricted, and all cargo shifted to the land corridor. Ukraine has now taken that corridor under fire as well. Russian propagandists see this strategy more clearly than Ukraine. Popular Z source, Madam Secretary, summarized the situation. A quite long and consistent strategy is becoming apparent. First came the clearing of the sea corridor, then attacks on the Black Sea Fleet, then the isolation of Crimea. In parallel, the campaign against refineries began. Gradually, a fuel shortage emerged. Now, pressure is also being applied to the highway. Pro-Russian commentator Ditrev went even further. Crimea is a very vulnerable place logistically. In past wars, the peninsula usually turned into a trap for the forces defending it. These assessments are not from Ukrainian analysts. They're coming from Russia's own ranks. And Ukraine's aim is not to launch a ground operation on Crimea. It's to make the peninsula unusable as a military base. Crimea functions for Russia as air defense, naval operations, command center, fuel depot, and a base for attacks against Ukraine. Ukraine is systematically eroding the logistics lines feeding each of these functions. The fleet retreated at sea, Kerch was restricted, refineries are being struck, the land corridor has turned into a death road, and depots inside Crimea are burning. The air control declared by Ukraine's 3rd Special Purpose Regiment on the Mariupol-Chongar route is the latest stage of this strategy. No longer just striking targets, but claiming de facto sovereignty over certain segments of the corridor. The strategy is clear, but ignoring Russia's cards would be a mistake. The damage at the Chongar Bridge is limited to the bridge deck. No complete collapse or major structural destruction. Russia has previously compensated for similar damage with pontoon bridges and rapid repair. After the 2023 storm shadow strikes, it restarted traffic within weeks. The land corridor is 630 kilometers long and offers multiple alternative routes. As long as Army and Perekop cannot be closed, complete isolation is not in question. The Kerch Bridge is restricted for heavy vehicles, but rail traffic continues, and Russia can still conduct ammunition and personnel shipments on this line. And Russia is also trying to take defensive measures. Additional air defense systems are being deployed around bridges. Convoys are being moved in small groups during nighttime hours, and decoy vehicles are being used for deception. But the race between repair and strikes is turning against Russia, and the turn is accelerating. In 2023, Chongar was struck with storm shadow missiles, expensive, limited in number, and every attack required major diplomatic debate. In 2026, striking the same bridge with kamikaze drones, costing a few thousand, has become possible. Ukraine's drone production capacity expands every month, and range is constantly increasing. The effective range that was 100 kilometers in 2024 exceeded 300 kilometers in 2026. This many big airs that when Russia repairs a bridge, Ukraine has the capacity to strike it again the very next night. Repair takes weeks, a strike takes one night. With every cycle, permanent attrition accumulates, and the resources Russia allocates to repair are being pulled from the front. And perhaps the most critical question is this: how much longer can Russia hold Crimea? And what will the cost of holding it reach? The peninsula is no longer a military asset, but a military burden. Every day, fuel, ammunition, repair, and human resources must be pumped to hold it, and those resources cannot go to the front. Every ruble spent defending Crimea is stolen from the resupply of units on the southern front. Zlogor Otravsky writes, "War studies on Crimea's transport isolation are being conducted, and this is no longer just analysis. It's the reality being lived on the ground." Bridges were the invisible front line of war, and Russia is losing that front. The artery feeding Crimea has been cut. Its depots have burned. Its streets are sinking into darkness. Ukraine turned Crimea from a military base into a logistics trap, and it continues to increase the pressure. We will continue to follow these developments. Thank you for watching.